The next and last thing, I believe, is Mr. Richardson or Dr. Hefner, perhaps, with the parameters for the 2014-15 general fund budget.
I'll just make a brief statement before Mr. Richardson takes it over here. Thank you very much for your support for the capital budget. Now, we're in the middle of budget season. Now that we've finished the capital, we dive into the deep into the pool with the general fund budget, which we've been working on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And this evening, Mr. Richardson will lead us in a discussion of the parameters regarding our general fund budget, as we will bring to you in the weeks ahead. And there are some things that have had are having a tremendous impact on us. We're very grateful to have Mr. Richardson. As you know, most recently he has been at the state level, so he has great knowledge of how the state funding works, or he did until everything started to change, so it's a learning curve for him as well. But we very much appreciate his being here, and of course, prior to working as the state's chief financial officer, he worked in a local school district, so he's aware of the issues we face, and will share those we'll share the parameters we're working with right now. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Dr. Hefner. The purpose of this short presentation is wanted to kind of give you an idea, an overview of the general fund budget process in a year where there are a lot of changes going on at the state level. It seems that they're happening almost daily. The whole funding model that the state has used for the last 40 years or so is changing. It's changing through a proviso in the current Appropriations Act, and I'm going to try to hit the highlights of this for you, if this will work. There we go. This is just a quote that I ran across a couple of years ago and loved it, and it seems to be more appropriate now than ever. The budget has evolved from a management tool into an obstacle to management. That seems to be where we are now. This is my disclaimer to what you're about to see. The information provided in this presentation is based on the 2014-2015 General Appropriations Bill as reported by the Senate Finance Committee as of May 1st, last Thursday. The projections that you see are actually based upon House Ways and Means projections as part of their budget process. And these projections are going to be changing as the Bill 4701, which is the Appropriations Act, progresses through the General Assembly. And so these projections, like I said, are just for illustration purposes only. I've handed out to each of you an information paper that is provided by the South Carolina Department of Education. It was last updated in September by myself. And this sort of will give you an overview of how state funding in the state works. It also gives you an idea of what the Education Finance Act is, which is by far the biggest line item appropriation that school districts see from the state level. Also in the handout that I gave you as well is the copy of the proviso which changes the current EFA law. This slide, this is just showing you the current weightings as they exist in statute. EFA, by the way, if you're interested, is an appropriation that's in excess of $1.3 billion statewide. The next slide shows you all of the changes that are taking place in the Appropriations Act process. All of your weightings outside of the students with disability weightings are changing. The students with disabilities weightings are staying as they are on the previous slide. And there are some add-on weightings that you'll see for gifted and talented, academic assistance, limited English proficiency, and pupils in poverty. I think I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in tracking, there's a bill, H 4968, which is a resolution that's currently sitting in a Senate subcommittee, which will actually permanently change this law. The Senate does have a rule, what they call Rule 24, which prohibits them from changing permanent law in the Appropriations Act. So that's why this joint resolution is concurrently working its way through the process. And this is an example of where we are this year as of the 45th day of school. Showing our weighted pupil units as compared to the state. We're at 2.32%, and our allocation of VFA dollars are at 2.47% of the state total. With the change, using a higher base student cost, the previous slide showed a base student cost using 2101. This slide shows a base student cost of 2120. And you can see that we're falling in proportion to the rest of the state with our weighted pupil units and our state allocation. And our percent of state dollars are projected to decrease going forward because of the new concept, I guess, of funding being directed more towards the poverty-stricken districts. Oh, and I would like to mention too, that base student, well, this next slide will illustrate what I was going to say. This next slide is just a snapshot of what's happening. Based on the House Ways and Means version of the budget, this district is projected to see an additional $2.2 million in EFA funding. But we are losing categorical funds of almost $900,000 for students at risk of school failure and $1.2 million for high achieving students. So our net increase is really $103,000 projected. This is a pretty significant piece of information here, because what's happening is for every dollar we're receiving for those categorical funds through this EFA formula, we're going to receive approximately 70 cents on the dollar because of the way the EFA works. It's a funding split between state and local. You'll hear that we're getting some new dollars, and we are indeed getting new dollars, at least what's projected right now, but almost $568,000 in technology funds. That is one-time lottery funding that is that we're projected to receive. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $29 million statewide, and of that, we're looking to get about $568,000, and that is really to be used for internal and external internet connections and one-to-one initiatives. The reduction in the students at risk of school failure and high achieving student funding is approximately $136 million statewide that's actually being redirected to the EFA. So when you hear that the base student cost is going up by $19, it is, but it's not. Just because of the way we're redirecting some of the way funding streams are coming to us. That, in a nutshell, is what we're looking at coming at us from the Appropriations Act. And I just wanted to make you aware that we have some other items that are going to play into this. And I guess my point of all this is that our salaries and fringe take up approximately 89 to 90% of our budget. You look at our purchase services, which are all our utilities and other types of contracts, that's about 5% of our budget. You take in all our supplies and equipment, that's another 5% of our budget. So that leaves about 1% of our budget that we really have any type of flexibility with. And so as our costs continue to rise, this funding change is going to affect some other items as well, like employer contribution, which is the fringe benefits that the district pays on behalf of our employees. That is about a $561 million appropriation statewide, We're getting approximately $14 million in this district currently, but that's going to change based on this new funding methodology. We're going to have a need for additional teaching positions. We're mandated to give step increases for our teachers. Our health and dental insurance is projected to increase by approximately 4%. And this is just the employer cost I'm speaking of. Retirement contributions are going to go up about 0.5%. Our workers' compensation is projected to go up 2.5%. Property and casualty insurance, 6.5%. And we, of course, we still have to pay our water, sewer, and electricity bills, which are going up as well. So I guess I'm being a Debbie Downer, but I just kind of want to prepare you for what we're looking at when we do, bring a budget before you. You got to understand that there's just a lot of things happening that we have no control over. And I would be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have at this time. I've also given you the links, and it's on your handout as well, for the appropriations bill and the provisos that go along with it.
Okay, questions? Mr. Turner?
Mr. Richardson, are we basically operating, if this bill is approved, with the same dollars next year that we had this year, pretty close?
Yes, sir. I think when you're looking at early projections, there's and you probably heard the term thrown out, hold harmless. There's going to be a push to have some hold harmless dollars that are given to certain districts in the state. I forget the number of them, 5 maybe, that would qualify for hold harmless funds, which basically means they're going to be losing money through this new funding methodology, but they're going to be held harmless for a year. We are a district that's right in the middle, so we're about at a break-even point right now. But I don't see that getting any better for us unless they start really radically increasing the base student costs in the future.
Mr. White?
Over time, your predecessors here, a number that always stuck in my mind is that on average our costs increase about 7% a year, with nothing new being added, just the inflation and the sort of things. And you enumerated some things that maybe not be 7% in the aggregate, but I guess when you say we're at a break-even point, is that on the where you're estimating we're going to be with our budget with these increases, or just the amount of money we got last year?
I'm saying the amount of revenue we can expect from the state. We're at about a break-even point.
So we do, and if an estimate of 7%, plus or minus 2%, we're going to have a shortfall more than likely to continue our current operations just based on the new funding formula.
Yes. I don't know what that figure is now. I will tell you this, that we're looking at every funding source that we currently have to ensure that we are fully and adequately utilizing those sources of funds, some categorical type funding, to ensure that we don't overburden our general fund when we bring you a budget. But I do suspect we will be coming in here with more expenditures than we have revenue at this time.
Is this current appropriation bill and these weightings, is there efforts to do something different than this? It just never seems to be right what we get from the General Assembly. It's always something that doesn't have any real rhyme or reason to what you're working with.
Well, I think, and I wish I had brought this, but I think what you're seeing is an effort to help the poor school districts, the quarter shame districts, I guess. But unfortunately, with the fact that there's not a great deal of additional dollars in the state appropriations, you're seeing districts like ours who succeed. We're sort of losing ground, I guess, on state funding. The base student cost that's currently being proposed is really probably, I didn't bring my charts, so don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere probably in the late 90s where this base student cost would have been appropriate. Late 90s, early 2000s. We should be in the $2,700 to $2,800 range base student costs currently if the General Assembly had done what it should have done over the years.
So is this shifting money away from districts that don't have as many impoverished students? But is there a policy consideration other than there's not enough money, or they expect local districts to have to raise taxes to fund that, or do they even care? I mean, it just seems.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I have my opinion on that, but obviously I don't know the answer to that. But, you know, on the flip side of that, they have tied our hands on how much we can raise locally as well. Act 388's done a pretty good job of limiting what we can do on an annual basis. You know, there used to be a law with EIA, Maintenance of Local Effort, which I don't know if you're familiar with it or remember it, but that was something that actually forced school districts to, you know, raise millage to keep up with inflation and to keep up with things. That's been off the books for several years now, probably since Act 388 came into existence back in, 2008.
It just sounds like just another problem coming down the road.
Very much so. Any other questions? Mr. Turner?
I guess going back to something that you and Mr. White were talking about, if we increase our expenses, I think Mr. White used 5%, we're looking at, about a $7 million increase in expenses just based on our current budget. And in the last several years, the most we could hope for with a tax increase was around 1.7. At least that's what it was last year. So with having very little, when you said that 90% of our budget's personnel expense, that 10%, if you adjusted that, you're taking half of it away. So you're really limited with what you can do with this budget, and other than rely on general funds or our general fund balance. Even with a tax increase, we still have a $5 million deficit if these numbers hold true.
And that's probably pretty close, honestly.
And I know everybody on this board probably understands this, but you know, it's sort of ironic that the thing that I've always been told and heard from the administrators is the single most important thing we do in generating quality is class size, and probably school size too. And so the easiest way to balance the budget is raise class size. So what you do, if you raise class size, you're affecting the most significant factor in the quality of what we do, and it's just so. I think I just even hate to think if we have to go there. And it's just, you know, $5 million. Where do you find $5 million? I mean, I've been sitting here on this board long enough. I know that you just don't pull $5 million out without making a lot of significant changes.
I can promise you I will definitely be trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat if I can. That's why I'm looking at every possible piece of funding that we have to see if there's anything we can do to offset some of this before we come in here with a budget that's not balanced. Because I would really hesitate to advise this district to start using fund balance for recurring items, because that's just going to dig us into a deeper hole down the road.
I'd like to ask a question about the reading coaches that are proposed, and how does that impact our school district, and what are the plans for that?
Well, that would be a help to our general fund. Because
that would be what, I'm sorry?
It would be a help to our general fund if what the House proposed were to happen, because I understand it, that we currently have individuals in this district that would qualify for that funding. The way it's currently, the number you see there is based upon one 100% funded reading coach and 11 half-funded reading coaches. The Senate Finance Committee, I just discovered this prior to the board meeting, has actually got a proviso dictating how those funds are to be used, but they have a no supplanting clause in that, which means that we cannot use that for current expenditures, to offset current expenditures. So I'm a little unsure where we're going now. We'll have to get an intent, a legislative intent on this to see if we'll be able to use it for current employees or not.
Well, that would make a huge impact on us then.
It could.
That could. And likewise, can you address the technology initiative funds and how that would impact us?
It's non-recurring, so we obviously wouldn't want to use it for
Yeah.
any type of recurring expenditures, but my understanding is for us to be able to provide additional bandwidth for internet connections inside and outside of the school, and it can also be used, if I'm not mistaken, for purchasing devices for one-to-one initiatives as well. And I think that's about it. There's a proviso that deals with that too that I haven't completely read through.
Okay. Mr. Turner?
This may be an impossible question, but based on where we are, I think you said with 9 months, we're roughly 75% of our year completed. And I think, and I don't want to quote him without him being here to defend himself, but I think Dr. Fulmer did tell us sometime last year that he was afraid that maybe this might be the first year in a few years that we might actually have to use some of this operational balance that's in this budget 3.7. I don't think we've had to do that for the last several years, but are you able to sort of estimate where we are today with what our revenue is? I would imagine that with our expenses being fairly fixed, with most of the overhead being in personnel, that will come very close to that expenditure side. But do you think we'll have to use any of this general fund transfer this year at this point?
I won't say definitively we won't have to. I do not believe that we'll have to use the entire $3.7 million. I am doing the same thing in the current years, trying to see what categorical funds that we may have available to us that we can possibly move some expenditures and relieve some of the pressure on the general fund. I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that I'm going to find millions of dollars. I don't expect that to be the case, but I'm hopeful that if we do have to go into that operational balance, it won't be close to the $3.7 million. And I will have a better picture on this probably in another month or so.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Gant?
Mr. Richardson, we appreciate you bringing this news, although I keep waiting for the good part of the story. You haven't got to that yet. It's not a great story right now, but from what it sounds like, this funding formula is definitely going to change. Nobody's just quite tying it down exactly, but the changes don't look good for a district like School District 5. Do you see any champions for public education that are trying to explain or really push into the whole harmless piece, or just to make sure we don't? I mean, I would imagine most districts are just like we are, highly, our dollars are used for personnel, and I would imagine that's the case across the state. And this could be a big impact everywhere.
It could be, in some districts in better shape than others, and their ability to raise money locally is better than others as well. But is there a champion for education? I think they all are. I just think there's some unintended consequences to what's happening now. That's my personal opinion. Senator Davis from Beaufort obviously is pushing very hard right now for a hold harmless provision due to the fact that Beaufort is expected to lose somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million through this funding shift.
Well, it's going to be interesting. You said just a minute ago that you would know more in about a month. That makes it pretty hard to budget right now, doesn't it? It's tough.
It's almost impossible to, I mean, we can budget expenditures all day long, but I've never been at a loss on how to at least project some type of revenue. I'm there now where I'm at a loss. I'm not really sure where we go from here, and I'm having to rely on the Department of Education to help us through some of this process. And with the updated numbers that we get at the 135th day, and the fact that they're going to be able to start trying to determine how they're going to implement it. I mean, I feel bad for those folks because they're the ones that got to implement this, and I'm not sure they're capable. They're operating off 30-year-old systems that they're going to have to change overnight. So it's going to be a struggle at best, and you know, another concern of mine would be that they're not able to implement it in a timely manner because of the vast changes that are happening. Then that sort of leaves us out here hanging for a little while.
And I remember we met with our legislators and our elected officials back in January, and after that, you wrote a very good information piece that talked about those parts about how to implement and a time frame to allow it to get in place. So I appreciate you being on top of it and working through it as deeply and as detailed as you have, but hopefully some of this will clear up soon.
Well, it'll clear up, but I don't think it helped us any. I sincerely wish I had been wrong when I sent that email earlier, but unfortunately it's coming true.
Thank you for your efforts.
Ms.
Could I?
Well, let me just follow up on his.
Okay.
I appreciate you bringing that up about, are there any advocates? And we have Day at the Capitol for school board members coming up on the 14th of May, so I don't know how many of us are able to go, but I think it would be great if we could get some good talking points and maybe a plan on what we should talk about and to whom we should talk in order to advocate for Lexington Richland 5. So we might call on you. I know you're really busy, but might call on you for a few talking points.
I might be able to help you a little bit.
Okay. All right. Mr. White.
And I guess this is for the board, but it just seems to me, I mean, we just go around in circles. It's this constant thing about the money. I mean, if you go to the Budget and Control Board and they, have a formula that says you ought to be funding this, it's sort of this random event about whether or not you get it. And then, if you were funding it with property taxes, then there was this outrage over that. And so General Assembly, caps that, and then we go back to this random event about whether you get the funding. So, all the promises were there going to be consistent funding when they changed the law, et cetera. But it seems that, no, we're not in a position to affect what the General Assembly does, but we are in a position to have a unified voice. And I think we ought to think about some public statement, whether it's a resolution or a letter that we all join in, that to our legislators and elected officials that affect this district and this community, and make it public so that the public can see what we're asking them to do and what this formula means to and no, we're not trying to say that the impoverished districts don't need help and shouldn't get help, but I think indirectly what this means is they're going to be lowering the quality of other school districts, and rather than lowering standards, they ought to be raising everybody to the same standards, and you can't accomplish that when you start letting go of teachers, and that's where class size, or you don't hire a sufficient number of teachers. And if we can have a unified statement that the public can see, then they can go talk to these people, because that's who they're going to respond to. They're not going to respond to necessarily the board itself, but the public ought to understand what you're telling us before it shows up in the schools next year. And then, 2 years of people understanding that things aren't the same, it'll create vocal opinions. But I think we ought to allow them to see what we see, and we can see it because you're telling us that it's coming. And I've been on this board long enough to know what a $5 million deficit means. It means it's not a pretty picture, and you're putting at peril the very attribute that has led to our success, which is a class size policy that ensures that students don't get lost sitting in classes that are too big for teachers to keep their attention, or to give them the attention they all need. And so I would suggest to see what y'all might think about something like that, or whether y'all think it's appropriate.
Any feedback from board members?
Well, Mr. White, if it had to come from teachers, I think we use $50,000 as the cost of an average teacher. And think that's 100 teachers if you try to make up $5 million. I mean, that's, if you said, well, how can we get there? Well, let's just get rid of 100 teachers and we've saved $5 million. I mean, that's the impact that, trying to make it up, because that's the only place, personnel, and that's what, it's what you're saying, that's what we're being forced to have to.
Yeah, and I don't think we should whisper it in our legislators' ears in a private meeting that nobody's attending. I think we ought to say it to the community and say it to the state, because there's a balance here. And if they want to take a finite amount of money and load it on other schools, then you're doing something to the schools you're taking it away from. And it's not that it doesn't matter. It will affect the quality of the education. And this district's always been a leader, and we ought to continue to be a leader, and we ought to speak out. Because this is going to have an impact. It's going to dilute the effect of what achieving districts are able to accomplish, and they ought to be bringing everybody up to the same bar, and it ought to start with our elected officials who are responsible for the school district in the General Assembly.
Mr. White, we might need your assistance in creating some proposal.
Do y'all think a resolution asking our elected officials? I think that'd be more effective,
Yeah.
or a letter. I mean, how it's presented, but I think it ought to be something that we make public. Now, we need to be careful in how we choose where we see the consequences, but I think they need to be framed, they need to be articulated, they need to be put out there where everybody understands this is what it means to what, this district has been able to produce consistently for extended periods of time for this community, and it's for the benefit of the students. I mean, our job here is to help students become, productive adults, whether they go into the workforce or whether they go to colleges, and that's the future. And that is basically defines not only this community, but wherever these students go and live. And so, I mean, I think we need to have a pretty bold proclamation that's very public about
right. I think that
what's the unintended consequence of what's happening.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I think that I see a lot of head nodding over here. So let's talk after the meeting, or perhaps tomorrow, and see about the logistics of getting that going. And Mr. Turner, I appreciate your very vivid portrait. That certainly does put it into some scary terms there. So I think that's really a good way to explain what can be very complex issues. So thank you very much for everyone's comments. I think this has been a very good discussion about the parameters, and this was a good idea. Dr. Hefner and Mr. Richardson, thank you very much, and we look forward to working on this together.
Thank you.
Any more comments before we adjourn? Seeing none, I'll take a motion for adjournment.